shed light on that, figure out what ways we can continue to unearth and solidify humanitarian corridors and continue to push for a political solution. That's absolutely a priority for ours, and we'll be continue to use ways to elevate that. That's not to say Syria, Gaza, Lebanon, Ukraine will not come up. I am sure that they are. And as someone who travels with the Secretary regularly, Matt, you know how much of his time he spends on all of these things. And
yeah, but I just want to know, I mean, is it incorrect, is the assessment that is out there, that some people have made, that Russia and China will veto anything that you attempt to do on Ukraine in the Security Council, and inside the Security Council, you are an island of one when it comes to Gaza resolutions. So So was the calculation that it would be basically a waste of time?
This was not a calculation, Matt. This was about using our presidency and using the Secretary's hallmark day for the presidency, when we often, you've covered a lot of secretaries, we often are able to commit 1 or 2 days to something like this, just given the other schedule constraints, wanting to utilize that time on what we view as affirmative priorities for the department and the Secretary. Beyond that, we have used the UN as a mechanism to do important business, both as it relates to the conflict in Ukraine, but also to do important business as it relates to the ceasefire and ending the conflict in Gaza. Let's not forget that the ceasefire deal that Saeed was talking about, this was one that has been supported by the vast majority of countries in the United Nations, which honestly, it's difficult to get them to agree on one thing. So it's just a testament to how we're going to continue to use bilateral channels, but also multilateral fora like this to do our foreign policy. Right, go ahead.
Thank you.
Yeah.
On Austin Tice, Prime Minister Netanyahu sent a letter to Austin Tice's mom saying that Israel is fully coordinated with the U.S. and that the IDF is not active where Austin is. But just the other day, the department had said they were not certain where Austin is. So how can the IDF, in coordination with the U.S., know they're not active where Austin is if the U.S. doesn't know for certain where Austin is?
So I will let the Prime Minister's office and the IDF clarify any comments or letters, that any engagements that they are having with the Tice family. What I can say from our perspective is that, again, making sure to locate and find Austin Tice is a priority for us. There are intensive efforts underway to find Austin. We've attempted to contact officials in the region for information. As you note, we have put out a $10 million reward for information about his location early last week. These kinds of lines of efforts are ongoing. I'm just not going to, I don't have any perspective to offer on what engagements the family may or may not have had with the Prime Minister's office.
But so you don't also know, for instance, which U.S. authorities Netanyahu's talking about that he's in coordination with?
You should reach out to the Prime Minister's office to clarify his comments. I'm not a spokesperson for him, which I know is sometimes frustrating for you all.
Well, just citing because he mentioned U.S. authorities, that's it. Okay.
Don't have any other perspective to offer.
Okay, on Israel's strikes in Syria, as you just mentioned, a justification for this has been that Israel's doing this with the vacuum of power, the possible instability, that fears of potential terror threats. How does more bombing, especially one after the fall of Assad, and one that has bombing that registers, as Saeed says, on the Richter scale, contribute at all to stability or peace?
So we have long said and long believed, first let's take a step back. Both before the Assad regime and afterwards, malign, destabilizing actors continue to operate in the region and have presence. I'm not a military tactician and certainly not going to get into the details of that. Perhaps colleagues of the Pentagon can do so, but there are malign proxy groups that operate in the region that are hostile to a variety of countries, including, of course, Israel. And so Israel has every right to defend itself. Israel has every right to its security. And as it relates to build up around the border, particularly, as you heard me say, it's our view and our understanding that these operations are limited. But beyond that, I will let the IDF speak to its own operations. We are continuing to remain focused on doing everything we can to maintain stability across the region. We're in constant contact with relevant regional partners and others. We know that this is a shared priority for a number of us.
And to clarify, in response to Said's question, he asked if this was an exercise of Israel defending itself, and you sort of defer to that question. But here you said that Israel has the right to defend itself.
It certainly has the right to defend itself broadly. I just don't have enough information as it relates to this particular incident to offer context on the operation, which, again, not a spokesperson for the IDF, which I'm sure they'd be happy to answer your questions.
Okay. And then you say that these attacks are temporary, and you refer to these groups. Do you know what Israel's strategic objective is with regards to these attacks? And I know that you've said you're not the spokesperson for them, but the U.S. is providing military aid to Israel, and so these questions do seem relevant. The country
again, I will leave it to Israel to speak to their military operations. Jenny, go ahead.
Any updates on engagement with HTS? Has that been regular? When was the last time there was any U.S.?
I don't have any updates on that, Jenny, beyond what Matt briefed earlier in this week, in that there have been engagements and communications, but I'm not in a place to get more specific beyond that.
And at what has that been at the level of Jelani or lower?
I'm just not going to get into that level of specificity. Sean, go ahead.
Can I change topic?
Yeah.
A few things, perhaps brief,
Sure.
perhaps not. The Chagos Islands in Mauritius. The new Prime Minister of Mauritius says that they're going to revisit the agreement with the UK on control, on sovereignty over the Chagos Islands. Of course, this affects the United States insofar as Diego Garcia, the military bases there. In the UK, Nigel Farage was saying that one factor here is U.S. disquiet. I presume he's meaning about the incoming administration and not the outgoing one. But do you have any comment on whether the U.S. is comfortable with the deal as it stands? Does it think it should go ahead rather than be renegotiated?
So, Sean, that's a great question. Secretary Blinken addressed this, I think, in October, and he said that we welcome the historic agreement between Mauritius and the UK on the status of Chagos. We've strongly supported negotiations between the two countries over the past couple of years, and we're pleased to see that this come to fruition through a diplomatic effort, and I will let both Mauritius and the UK speak to any other comments about the process and the current status and how they're thinking about timelines.
Okay, but as far as you're concerned, as far as the U.S. is concerned now, you're comfortable with the deal?
We continue to be supportive of this, and we are, again, pleased about the diplomatic outcome, but on timelines, on implementation, on those kinds of specifics, I'd defer to the two parties to speak to it.
Two separate ones.
Yeah.
Do you have any update on Vanuatu? I know you had the statement yesterday, but do you have any update on the embassy operations, on potential U.S. assistance?
So we stand ready to provide support in coordination with Australia and New Zealand and other partners in the region. We're continuing to monitor the situation, including from our embassy in Port Moresby, where the ambassador is accredited to Vanuatu in residence. My understanding is that embassy operations continue to be operating from Port Moresby, but I'm happy to see if we have a specific update on operations or anything like that. The ambassador is set to travel to Vanuatu later this week as well.
Is set
from
to travel
Papua New Guinea to Vanuatu.
Okay.
Yes, correct.
And just a final thing, completely different. Ghana,
Yeah.
the anti-LGBTQ law, the Supreme Court essentially paved the way for it. So awaiting the signature of the president, but of course they had an election and a new president's coming. Has the U.S. had any communication? Does it have any message in terms of whether it wants the president to? Presumably the U.S. opposes it, but has the U.S. been communicating on its position?
So we've previously stated our concerns about this bill, and we remain in close contact with Ghanaian government officials and with the incoming administration of President-elect Mahama across a range of issues. We take note of the announced ruling dismissing the two challenges of legislation. And ultimately, Sean, our primary concern is the safety and well-being of vulnerable populations and individuals. Nobody should be targeted, threatened, harmed, or marginalized on who they are.
Just about can you just say that the U.S. wants it to be stopped? This law.
Look, I'm not gonna. I don't have anything further to say beyond what I offered. Goyle, go ahead.
Thank you, sir. Two questions, please. Last meeting between Secretary Blinken and India's Foreign Minister, Mr. Jaishankar, took place in end of November in Italy at the G7. So what was the basic discussions between the two leaders, the future of U.S.-India relations from this building, and also if they had discussion as far as visas backlogs are concerned, and situation in Bangladesh as far as atrocities against the Hindus there?
So we have, of course, a wide range of issues, and we have a close partnership with our counterparts in India. Of course, a range of those are security issues, trade issues, of course, consular issues as well, including visas. We read out that meeting with External Affairs Minister Jay Shankar. I don't have any other details to offer beyond just saying that over the course of our time in the Biden administration, India has been a key partner in the Indo-Pacific on a number of shared issues, and we continue to look forward to working with them in our time in this administration.
And second one, sir, why I brought this Bangladesh issue because thousands and thousands of Hindus are demonstrating around the U.S. and also in Washington, D.C. recently last week, and in India and also in Bangladesh. Atrocities have been committed against the Hindus in Bangladesh. Even Bangladeshis came from all over the U.S. in Washington to demonstrate, asking the State Department, Secretary Blinken, of course, he's very famous in India, that to intervene. At the same time, they are calling now that it's not that atrocities against the Hindus, but also against minorities, and they are calling on the International Criminal Court, ICC, or the United Nations, and of course U.S. to intervene and bring those to justice, including the interim Prime Minister Mohammed Yunus, against those. What is happening? What message the Secretary have for those who are really relying on the United States?
So this is an area of course, vital importance to us. Anywhere around the country, we want to make sure first that protests are taking place peacefully, that the basic human rights and human dignities of all people are being respected, and that is something that we will continue to stress with counterparts and partners around the world, including in the case of Bangladesh, of course, the interim government as well. In the back, go ahead.
Thank you, sir. Thank you.
In the brown jacket, yeah.
Yeah.
You.
Excuse me. Today in Egypt, Dr. Yahya al-Qazzaz, who was arrested for criticizing Mr. Abdel Fattah al-Sisi, passed away in their custody. And many organizations, international human rights organizations, they stated that the political arresting is still going in Egypt. And we saw that Department of State this year assisted like that. Like U.S. Egyptian regime has made progress in human rights, while these unfair trials, political prisoners like dying in custody for various reasons, according to these organizations. Why you made this change in the assessment, and you said for public that Egyptian regime, like a few months ago, like a couple months ago or 3 months ago, you said that Egyptian regime made a good progress in human rights, while it seems it's not yet. Is it because of like a political reason? Because it's not seems like this like assessment has it changed for objective reasons. So like how you comment on this criticizing?
So as it relates to that specific incident, I don't have a comment for you. I'm not familiar with it beyond just saying that our expectation is that anybody in detention needs to be affronted their basic human rights and treated with dignity. I think the second part of your question you were referring to is the announcement we made around FMF funding for Egypt. Is that correct?
Not specifically about funding, but you said in this statement that Egypt made a progress.
Which it has.
Made a progress for human rights. Why
we also said we
no.
also said in that same time period that of course there continues to be work in progress that needs to be done, and we continue to stand by that as well. But the FMF funding, there are designations and authorities that the Secretary of State has to offer waivers based on national security interest, and of course the Secretary made the determination that it was the United States national security interest in some areas, and then in some other areas we have seen that our partners in Egypt had made progress. I'm happy to get some specific language for you and share the breakdown of how we talked about it. That was from a couple weeks ago.
Second question in Syria, last question in Syria, United Europe and European partner, it seems like they're going to removing some sanction because of certain sectors for reconstructing Syria. Will USA is going to consider certain sectors like healthcare, like housing, like something areas for removing some sanctions that may be helping or like accelerate the idea of rebuilding, reconstructing Syria, or like you are going to keep all sanctions in Syria until further notice?
So I just don't have any news to announce or policies to share. As you heard Matt say earlier in this week, when it comes to the designation of groups or sanctions that may or may not remain in place, what we are looking at and what we are keeping an eye out on is actions that we see the regime take, and so that's what we'll continue to remain focused on. But I'm not going to opine any further beyond that. In the red, in the back, yeah.
Just moving back to Gaza for a really quick sec.
Yeah.
The BBC reported yesterday that they, citing a Palestinian source, that Israel stopped air and drone operations over the Gaza Strip, or at least parts of it, for 6 hours on December 7th to allow Hamas to assess the condition and the whereabouts of hostages across the region, including U.S. hostages. Can you confirm that? And have you received any updates from Hamas through mediators recently pertaining to the status of U.S. hostages in Hamas?
So, to the first part of your question, I will let our partners in Israel and the IDF speak to any of their operational details, and that would certainly fall into the bucket of that. Secondly, I don't have anything to get into from up here as it relates to hostages beyond just saying that we are working tirelessly to do everything we can to get a ceasefire deal, and of course a key integral pillar of that is making sure that the remaining hostages can be returned home, and we're going to work tirelessly as it relates to that. In the blue, go ahead. Yeah.
Thanks. So Bangladesh government has announced it will go for elections probably end of 2025 or early 2026.
Yep.
What's the U.S. position on that?
So we welcome steps that have been taken by this interim government of Bangladesh to prepare for elections that ultimately will allow the Bangladeshi people to choose their own government representatives. This is something that we're going to continue to monitor regarding the timing, and of course we're going to encourage the respect of the rule of law over the course of this whole process, as well as the respect for democratic principles should a transition come to fruition. And as we would throughout the world, we would advocate for free and fair elections conducted in a peaceful manner.
Thanks. A follow-up question.
Yeah, go ahead.
So the New York Times has published a finding of an inquiry commission in Bangladesh that was investigating the issues of enforced disappearances. The commission report is finding involvement of a former prime minister. The U.S. previously imposed sanctions on the people involved in enforced disappearances. Do you have a comment on that?
So we have been deeply troubled by the reports that hundreds of Bangladeshis were forcibly disappeared over the past 2 decades. Enforced disappearance is an egregious human rights violation that inflicts the trauma of indeterminate detention or disappearance on its victims. It also inflicts the trauma of uncertainty on the families. We welcome efforts by the interim government to investigate these crimes and encourage fair and transparent processes to provide justice for the victims and their family members. All right. Thanks, everybody.